Pushkin. Joe Henry and Mike Reid brought two distinct but complementary legacies to their new collaborative album, Life and Times. Joe is a celebrated producer and songwriter known for his atmospheric, deeply literary approach to Americana. Over the decades, he's produced albums for artists like Solomon Burke, Raitt, and Elvis Costello, while crafting his own work that blurs the line between folk, jazz, and rock. Mike Reid, a former NFL defensive lineman turned Grammy-winning country songwriter, has written hits like I Can't Make You Love Me and has long explored the tender spaces between strength and vulnerability. Their album, Life and Times, captures conversations between two seasoned storytellers, their voices and perspectives interweaving across songs that examine memory, mortality, and the passage of time with unflinching honesty. On today's episode, Bruce Headlam talks to Joe Henry and Mike Reid about how they developed a deep friendship over their shared love of poetry at a songwriter's retreat. They also discuss the artists and songs that first drew them to songwriting. And they reflect on their individual creative processes and how they found new ways to inspire each other's work. This is Broken Record. Real musicians, real conversations. Just a quick note here. You can listen to all of the music mentioned in this episode on our playlist, which you can find a link to in the show notes. For licensing reasons, each time a song is referenced in this episode, you'll hear this sound effect. All right, enjoy the episode. Here's Bruce Headlam with Mike Reid and Joe Henry.
We're welcoming two great songwriters, even legendary songwriters. Mike Reid, who had, I think, a dozen number one country hits. Is that right?
I've been told, Bruce, it varies from 20 down to a dozen, and you never know what publication they're referring to. So I guess maybe that has a lot to do with it. I have feelings about number one records too. That they're not only a handful of them are really authentic hits. And when I say hit, I even sort of regard that slightly differently. To me, it's whatever song impacts people's lives, whatever they take into their lives. And sometimes commercial hit songs are a little more than distraction. That's fine. If you can write something that speaks to someone's life, good for you.
Just tell me you cashed the checks.
I did. That's a very, very fair thing for you to say, by the way. Yes. I had, when it came to that, yeah.
You know all the number ones then.
The terrible thing for me to say is that sort of principled thinking is an affordable commodity. So you have to be careful not to take yourself too seriously.
I think maybe what you should say from now on is it's not the number ones, it's the zeros that count.
I'll tell you, if you want a shorter answer, just ask me how many number ones I've had.
But I would ask you how many impactful songs you've written.
Absolutely.
Songs that are deeply woven within the fabric of people's lives. I mean, isn't Hanjo? That sort of?
Well, that is the hope.
Yeah, that is the hope. And I think even if you're, Bruce, if you're a commercial, quote, whatever that means, songwriter in Nashville, Tennessee, yeah, there's an element, I suppose, where it's the business. There's an element you have to be careful about the cynicism of money. But I have no reason to think those kids writing songs now don't want to do the same thing that Joe Henry has done, which is impact people's lives with his words and his music.
Well, you jumped in and introduced Joe for me.
Yeah, good.
When I mention Joe to people, I always say, a great producer of many, Elvis Costello, Raitt, Alan Toussaint. But as a songwriter, I think it was Rosanne Cash said, you're the one who keeps raising the bar for the rest of us. So that's high praise.
Coming from her, absolutely.
And you've done it again. You guys got together to produce this album, Life and Times. We just heard the first song, Sleeper Car. Can you tell me how this came together?
As far as how we came together to begin working at all, we found ourselves both part of the so-called faculty at a songwriting camp in Nashville in August of 2022 that my dear friend Rodney Crowell runs.
I have to stop you there. Is that because that sounds like an insane amount of fun?
Well, let me just say it's intense work because people come from far and wide and they pay no small sum of money to be there in hopes of learning something that I don't know that can be taught. So I have some high anxiety, in fact,
You
about
don't think songwriting can be taught?
I like what Rodney says. I don't know if it can be taught. I believe it can be encouraged. And I think people who have anything going on, and it doesn't have to be something that I respond to, is it something that they're responding to? I think what we can teach is refinement and strategies around, just personally speaking, just getting into motion. Because I think that's the biggest obstacle for people, is just beginning. And there are all kind of things that I've learned to do for myself over years, just to trick myself into some kind of motion. Because when that happens, invariably, I encounter something that I can work with.
What are those tricks?
This is going to sound overly obvious, but if I'm sitting in a hotel room, for instance, or in a moving vehicle, as I was when I wrote a lyric just the other day, I just start somewhere describing something that I see. And somehow just a descriptive gesture will lead to, what's the response to that thing that I see? And who is that character responding? And next thing you know, you're in the middle of some kind of a story. It might not be a linear narrative, but something starts to emerge if you pay attention to it. And I just encourage people in that case to stay in the seance of it as long as possible before you're ever thinking about whether it has any use to you or not. John Cage said, don't confuse the creative mind with the analytical mind. They both have a purpose, but they're not the same animal. I like to try to stay, in that part of the river that's sweeping you away for as long as possible before I get up and climb out onto the bank and start looking down at it and evaluating it. Because once that's happened, you're not being swept away. You're not being seduced any longer. How long can the seance be sustained? So you're just spooling off raw fabric, and then it's quite easy in some regards to come back later to that raw fabric and then, fashion a pair of slacks out of them that you can walk around in. But that first generation of raw fabric is the thing that stymies most people. How do you just get that wheel turning to begin with? And then you can decide, based on what kind of spools around you, where you might go with it.
I would say, as someone who's been an editor his whole life, I think those animals are actually enemies in the wild. And I've seen this particularly in other editors, really brilliant editors I've worked with at the New York Times and elsewhere. They have to stop writing because the analytical part of it just overwhelms them.
For sure. I mean, if I find that voice, if I'm in the midst of writing anything in that first burst, if I find myself for a moment even wondering, is this any good? Do I like it? Will my wife like it? Will anybody who cares about what I do like it? I'm done for the day, or at least for that period of time, because I know I've taken myself completely out of the stream. And it's easy to get there. It's easy to stay in that analytical, judgmental part of it. How long can we stay free of judgment? I mean, that's translatable to so many aspects of our lives, as music so frequently is.
I agree with Joe. I don't think it can be taught. Like in that, when Joe and I were at the Rodney's camp, it's sort of like instructing or teaching people about the experience of their own lives. Stanislavski said, acting is behaving truthfully in imaginary circumstances. And it may be, you don't have to have lived what you're writing, but I think you have to understand the emotional atmosphere of the thing, And very often, I find in those camps, Joe, that people come and they think, they're going to find some technical secret, more complicated than just, hey, I'm sorry to tell you this, but writing teaches writing. If you can't spend all day, I get that, but you can spend a chunk of every day addressing it. I don't care, if it's 15, 20 minutes. The more you get in the habit of sitting down, Mary Oliver writes a beautiful ideas about showing up for that part of you that desires to be given voice to. I always tell young writers, talent, commitment, they're fine. That's fine, but they're not quite enough. You have to be compelled to show up. If you do that over the long haul, I think things begin to happen you might not have thought would.
And you are very disciplined in your writing, aren't you?
Yeah. I get up every morning, and often Joe and I will text. He's in Maine, I'm in Nashville. We text over the first wonderful cup of coffee, which is a great, sublime moment for both of us, I think.
Yeah.
And then I will see what's on my mind. But now, lately, I stay away from the piano because as an old person, my hands have a tendency to want to go to comfortable, familiar places. So when Joe, for example, Bruce, when Joe sends me words, I will often print them and take a walk in around the yard with them, or I have a wooded area there around the house, and into nature, get them out into nature, and I will speak them out loud into nature, into the air, to get the sound of them in the world. And then that helps me get a little closer to understanding what is the atmosphere these words are conveying. And then can I find what the musical sound might be?
You know, when I talked to you, Joe, and this was years ago, you had talked about using open tunings, different tunings, anything to get your hands out of that comfort zone.
Anything to disorient me a little bit.
Yeah. Now, Mike, you've played piano for a very long time.
Yeah, since I was a kid.
How do you can retune a piano, but you really don't want to do that. Is there something you do at the piano to try and defamiliarize your fingers with what you're doing?
Can I show Joe this little thing? Bruce, this is what I do. And if someone's listening, they may. Because we tend to sit down at an instrument. So what I do, Bruce, to get away from that, is I imagine a room of 4 people, right? And no one is going to say anything until they absolutely have something undeniable to say. So I start extremely small like that, very small, with very small elements. Maybe at that point, then a melody. I have Joe's words in front of me. I may begin to hear the sound of what they might sound like with a voice driving them. And sometimes we'll write a verse. Not write a verse. I will discover a verse with just playing that one note or 2 notes. So that's what I do to get away from those. And then you'll eventually find your way back to something. But then I will go and say, okay, I'm not a mystic of any kind, but I think Arthur Miller, the great playwright, referred to it as the hidden narrative. There is something that wants to come through. And I do my best, and I usually fail. I do my best to stay out of the way of that and listen for it, and try to hear it before I insist me into the proceedings.
Now, you said there were 4 people in the room. We started with 1.
I mean, it's a little thing that I do, and it could be very possibly I spend too much time alone in my little workroom. Right. And I end up doing unnecessary things. I like small. When I'm lost and confused, I think less might be, not more.
I've learned some of those tricks from, that John Cage used to do with wordplay, and people like William Burroughs kind of picked up on it from Cage, I think. Well, I just, pick up, the nearest book to me. There's always something close by, and just open it at random and decide that at the top of the left-hand page, I have to incorporate a verb and a noun that I find, one or the other. And just by insisting that I utilize it, it's going to suggest something, and you can try as hard as you want. It's impossible to put 2 words together that mean nothing, because the mind is trained to find some kind of sense, some kind of gesture toward narrative in there. When you start looking for relationship, you invariably find relationship. There's no such thing as no relationship. Even if it's complete, what we would call chaos, that is a relationship to something.
Interesting you described it that way, because I would say, and this is going to sound like an insult, and I don't mean it to be an insult, your lyrics make the listener work a little harder, I think. You're going, yeah, I know, like that's a bad thing. I want to hit, darn it. Yeah.
I think it's perfectly fine that people are invited to be active as listeners. Almost every single night I play a show, I make a point of saying to an audience at the end of the night, Listening is not a passive activity. And I appreciate anybody who brings their attention and time to bear. So, yes, I expect that people, if they're paying attention to what I'm doing, they might have to work harder than they do when they engage other things. I don't know. But I've had this conversation with Brad Mehldau, the great pianist, who said, you can't read Shakespeare without really bringing your full intellect there. You can't read Blake. You can't listen to Beethoven. You can't listen to Coltrane without bringing your real attention there. And that's part of what activates the process. That's part of what makes music a vibrant connection between people. If I'm only broadcasting out, that just sounds like pure ego to me. The electrical current only is complete when it becomes a circular loop. If I'm not feeling something back from a listener, even if it feels abstract, even if I'm home alone, something activates me into believing that there's a vibrational element to what I've just written that does not just belong to me. I don't believe that I can alone have that experience. If it's buzzy to me, it's because I believe that there are other people who will catch that if I push it forward.
Right. It's like lightning. It meets in the middle.
Yeah, and I do think it's mystical. I sometimes am shy to talk about it in mystical terms, except that I just think that it is.
We'll be back with more from Mike Reid and Joe Henry after the break.
So as listeners, when you got together, what did you hear in each other's work that you thought that this would be a fruitful partnership?
I can answer that question honestly. I have no idea. When we met on that first day of this camp, we just by happenstance found ourselves walking across the grass at Vanderbilt, where this camp was hosted, and in line together at the dining hall. Thus, we sat at a table together, and we found ourselves really quickly. I didn't have one notion that Mike knew who I was in any sense, but we found ourselves really quickly talking about the poets that we love in common. And that connection was energizing to me, to the point where in the subsequent days, every time there was a coffee break, I was looking for Mike. I was looking for this conversation to continue. Yet when we parted company, when everybody left the camp, we didn't communicate for a couple months. But one day I'd been visiting my dad in North Carolina, and I was stripping the bed before we left, and I heard a couplet sort of unspool in my mind. And for whatever reason, I stopped what I was doing, and I texted Mike and reminded him who I was and asked him, would he like to try to write something together? I don't really know, other than the fact that I understood that he comes from a different musical tradition than I do, and I wanted to get out of the same habits that he's talking about his hands having at a piano. I know, because I come out of a folk and country blues tradition melodically, even though I studied the Great American Songbook. I'm a Duke Ellington freak. I've put myself into that music as deeply as I can. I don't have a lot of facility articulating music in that way, though my imagination is fired by it. And I'm sure that I recognized in what Mike does and what his background truly is, that has little to do with so-called country music, that he understood a lot of nuance and a lot of the elements that create that kind of architecture that the Great American Songbook standards share. And I wanted to get free in that way. I wanted to be able to move into that kind of nuanced melodic invitation. I wanted to know what it would do to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what the couplet was?
Sure. It's the beginning of the song Room, which is song 3 on the record. It's the first thing we wrote. I wake to a room with a story to tell. Its silence was iron, the strike of a bell. That's what I had. I knew that wasn't just a flat wall. I heard that couplet as a door that might be opened. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty specific phrase to just announce itself in your mind.
I mean, the reason I ask is that I know I've reread some interviews you've given, and you talk a lot about rhyme and how you react to it. How did you react to that one?
To underscore Joe's story about us meeting at that songwriting camp. I did know his work. And when I was very anxious about sitting across the table from him, because he did what I suspected within myself but couldn't get to. And I was such an admirer of his that I thought, I will have nothing to offer this guy. But then that dissipated the minute we began to talk about poets that we both loved. And your idea that Joe's words make people work, I don't really feel that way, Bruce. Joe's words immediately, and starting with Room and from then on, my sense, here's the word that I use, they were summoning me towards something. They were summoning me into a place that I suspected, I knew was alive, but maybe I couldn't get there on my own. And when I started working with these words and finding, melodic snippets here and there, it's a very first thing I said to him. He asked, "Do you want to write?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm very slow, but if you want to push off the dock into the fog, I'm your guy." Yeah. The minute I think, what did Eliot say? One only in the Four Quartets, one only gets the better of words for the thing one no longer has to say, or the way in which one is disposed to say it. I'm not putting down commercial music or pop songs that speak, romantically to people's lives. I'm not. That's wonderful. I think we're here one time. Love something. I happen to love the things that summon me into a place that is, by the way, not outside of me. They're summoning me within, they're asking. One never knows when you're getting close to that hidden narrative. It happens, and it's exciting, but when it doesn't happen, I have found there's not a lot you can do to fix it other than maybe a good night's sleep. Get away from it. I absolutely adore the people in his songs. Because every living thing, Bruce, every living thing has a pressure exerted on it by simply existing. And who we are physically, what we look like, what we say, do we have tattoos, do we have no tattoos, is a response to that pressure. And Joe's people in his songs are often confused, but looking for light. Always looking for light. And so that's me. I think confused and looking for light, I hadn't thought of that to this moment. That perfectly describes me, even now at this point in life.
Well, and it describes a lot of the songs as well on this album.
Well, I think so. I hope, look, I'm not convinced the music that I found for these songs is up to those words. And I won't be. I can make a peace with it, and I can accept what's there. And I hope that the music does not get in the way. I tend to be very protective of Joe's words. And yeah, would I like to go out there? Sure. But then there's the composer obscuring the words. And I don't want to do that. I don't know if you've ever listened to Copland's Emily Dickinson song cycle or Samuel Barber songs, particularly Sure in the Shining Night, a great James A.G. and Barber being a great composer, but it's so in support of those beautiful, beautiful words. And I'm old now, and I'm confronting my limitations. And so anything that gives me a chance to maybe exceed them or at least bang my head against them, I'm going to do that.
It's interesting you mentioned how the music interacts with the words, because when I sort of re-listen to the album as a whole, they're piano ballads. And I almost started to think of this album could have like an old 19th century piano ballads cover. And particularly some of the phrases you use to introduce the songs almost sound like a kind of Stephen Foster.
Oh, that's what a thing to say. Well, Bruce.
But then the lyrics are not Moon June.
What a nice
Spoon.
That was never the intent. That was not the intent, but I love you. Because look, to Joe's point earlier, we must, no matter if it's a little, simple little 3-chord country song, if it's a great blues song, if it's a Joe Henry lyric, a Wallace Stevens, Elizabeth Bishop poem, that kind of work is asking us to open up the bags of our lives on it. What does it fire within me? Joe's never sent me a lyric, Bruce, that it didn't fire something in me. Now, could I explain that to you at this moment? Probably not, or I could and be a lot of hot air, a lot of gas. We don't need that. But Joe's never sent me words that didn't fire something in me, a relationship with the character. Because I don't see, Joe, you should speak to this, I don't see Joe necessarily. To Joe's point, you cannot put 2 words together without it meaning something. Mm-hmm. So it comes out of Joe Henry. He is the vehicle through which it passes. So it's going to be. But I don't necessarily, Joe, think your songs are all you. I mean, I'm thinking, my heavens.
Oh, no. I could count on less than a single hand the times that I think I've written something that, where I am in some way the character. Actually,
mm-hmm. And yet, let me interrupt you, Joe, because Bruce, I have an obsession right now with a Joe Henry song, and it's only going to get worse. I know this is
a song on this album.
No, it's the Short Man's Room album.
Yeah,
and it's the song "Short Man's Room," because I am so passionately in love with the character in that song. And what do I love, Joe? What do I love about that is that it came through Joe. So, it's not wholly, you're not totally not on the fringes of that.
Oh, I don't say that I'm not involved.
Yeah, all right.
I'm just saying I might just be the ring bearer, but I'm not necessarily the bridegroom of the story. And look, I won't pretend that I think that, I'm just visited upon and I don't have any relationship, but I'm not conscious of that. And if I was conscious of writing about my own life, I think I would pull back, not because I'm afraid of revealing too much or, my privacy or whatever. I just feel like my personal experience is too finite a space, from which to, launch any real discovery. I've thought of that a lot, that, in the 70s when I was a young person, obsessed with songs and trying to figure out how they came into being. And there was the singer-songwriter movement that seemed to suggest the more honest you were to your real life, that's how good the song was. Mm-hmm. And in that regard, I think honesty is completely overrated. Or what are you being honest to? My own personal life is such a finite space to explore, but I take the same lens and point it out. I'm still witnessing through the lens of my own life experience. Mm-hmm. The goal isn't, not like Cage, who was looking for ways to create music that hadn't no trace of his ego in it, just to see what that would sound like. I'm not pretending that that's my goal. I just don't want to be limited by my own imagination. I don't want to be limited by just the small experiences that, certainly when I was a young writer, that I'd had. I didn't think I'd lived enough life to write about. But my desire to reach out and create character, like Fellini used to say, I just create a character and find out what he or she has to tell me. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt about songs. Like, I want to begin a song in whatever way I can and then see what it does to me, see what it's asking me to do in service of it, not in service of me. How can I be in service to it? And how can it tell a story that's bigger than I am?
Are there any parts of you that you think launch some of these songs?
Sure. I mean, I was just telling this on stage the other night. There's a song called Stray Bird. And, I frequently don't know where a beginning of a song comes from. It just seems to be there, like somebody sees a ladybug on them. There it is. You want to deal with it or not? Mm-hmm. In this case, the song Stray Bird, my wife Melanie and I were visiting my sister-in-law in the Hamptons out on Long Island a couple of summers ago, and watching our young nieces in the pool at dusk. And I just happened to look up and notice that the side of her house was on fire. The chef had left the heating grill too close to the cedar shingled house. And I look up, the house is on fire. Not a big fire, but it was asking for attention. I grabbed somebody else's jacket. It didn't need to be mine. For
Took off
God's
yours
sake.
immediately.
Yeah. And put the fire out. Now, I have this wonderful young niece, and I knew that she was writing poetry in school. I think she was probably about 9 in that moment. So I challenged her. I said, hey, Stella, let's both write a poem about what happened tonight and read it to each other at breakfast in the morning. Now, Stella didn't do the assignment, but I did. And it got me started. It wasn't the whole lyric, because then it went somewhere else where I wanted to make reference to her in some kind of way. Not her, I just wanted to use her name by way of connecting it to her. But it does start, the house caught fire just after dark on a cold night in July. That is precisely what happened. Mm-hmm. And that's what put that song in motion. My reaction to that moment and realizing that wasn't the biggest drama happening in the story. That's just a place that came out of a real life experience. I'm not writing about myself. I'm writing about something about my reaction to an actual moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but then the song goes on, and I quote, this is like a 60 Minutes interview suddenly.
Yeah, well, I'm all here for it.
The man I was just yesterday is scarcely here to stand. His every sway now stripped away, the bird that leaves my hand.
I know where this is going, and I can't, I can't right now say that you're wrong, because I hear what you hear. But was that a conscious thought in my mind? Absolutely not. And had I been aware of how potentially revealing that phrase is, hats off to you for coming up with it so quickly, I would have steered around that fucking thing with everything I had, probably. But when I saw it later, I was like, oh.
Well, this is 60 Minutes. It's like I'm showing you internal company documents.
Yeah.
And you're like, well,
I'm not sure that's not my signature, Yeah.
That came through another part of the company. It's just such a beautiful, sway does a lot of work there.
Yeah, it does.
Because sway also means power,
Yeah.
influence.
Yeah.
And it also means your balance.
Yeah.
And a bird flying away, which would seem almost weightless, how it would affect that.
Yeah, I love words that both are specific enough to be committed, but that have more than one way to be heard. So you're not nailing anything down to the floor. You're not limiting anybody's response to it. As there's only one way in and out of this house. Mm-hmm. I try to leave as many doors and windows open as possible so that people can enter them however they might. I might not know what's the most significant part of any song. I know where I think the drama is, I think, when I've written something. But I frequently find out that people have really other responses than I do to it as a finished piece. And I would never suggest that my interpretation, once it's done, has any more relevance than somebody else's.
Okay, well, we're going to go from the Hamptons to Pennsylvania, where you grew up. Tell me when music first entered your life.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful question. My grandmother, my father's mother, we grew up next to her, right next to the house. And her mother, my great-grandmother, lived on a farm, maybe 6 miles away. And there was an old, on my grandmother's sun porch, there was an old upright, a lot of the keys didn't work. But I remember, Bruce, my first memory of life is probably about 3, when I was 3, sitting on that bench banging on the keys. And then my great-grandmother, when she got very old and needed to be cared for, they moved her down from the farm. And I would play for her in that sun porch. And what I would play for her was really, I think, you hear a lot of things, to Cage's point, about 4 minutes and 33 seconds is his idea is that there is no such thing as silence. You hear a lot of things. But intentional listening, so to play for my great-grandmother, who would sit there in the summer heat wrapped in blankets, due to circulation, hymns. And I think the first music in my life that I became aware of intentionally listening to were the hymns in church. I loved Not necessarily praise hymns. I loved those songs of surrender, where people say, you know, I'm lost, I'm broken. Where do I go from here? And I think in many ways that that music informs even to this day.
And what was the church? What denomination?
It was just I would love to be able to sit here and tell you it was Baptist. And we were rolling in the aisles. But no, it was an old Methodist, just a Methodist denomination. And whatever the hymns were, I always tell young writers, they say, well, you know, in this climate, why write? You know, well, you got to get it into the world. Get it into the world. John Newton got off a slave ship. I thought he was a captain of it. I don't think he was. But he was on a slave ship, and he had a epiphany about what was going on. And he went home and he prepared a sermon for the following Sunday. And during that sermon, preparing that sermon, he wrote the words, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Now, and I always tell young writers, you cannot tell me John Newton thought, well, in 250 years, the whole world will know those words. No, you got to get it into the world, you know, get it. But I heard that. I love that kind of music. And then when I was 13 years old, my father worked in I think he was a miner when he was younger, and then he worked in the job to have in those days when I was a kid was in the Pennsylvania Railroad. He worked in the railroad. Mom sold shoes when my brothers and I were able to take care of ourselves. And I rode my bike across town. I was about 13 to a dear buddy, Dave Barry, and he played me Van Cliburn and Fritz Reiner's recording of the Beethoven Emperor. And I had no idea in 13 years of living on this earth that such a sound existed. So those two things, I think, were things that the hymns were a gradual thing. The Beethoven, the Emperor and the Birth of My Children, I think are the only things that I can say changed me in a moment, really, that made me. I missed the experience Joe had, you know, being touched by the people he was. I was very slow to, you know, for example, I would be lying to you. I was very slow to Dylan. I was very slow to the Beatles. You know, they were up and almost broken up by the time I discovered Let It Be or Abbey Road. You know, did you ever see the movie 2001, the Stanley Kubrick?
Sure.
You know, the scene of the apes around the monolith? Right? And they're not sure, they're compelled into it and they're frightened of it. That's what music was for me. I was drawn into it. I had no real natural ability in it. My abilities were in the physical world, were in the athletic world. But I was so compelled. And I must say, you know, the physical comes and goes, as you well know. I'm towards that dissipating time. But the thing being compelled into music has only gotten stronger and continues.
You said you were compelled towards it but afraid of it. What were you afraid of?
I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know. And then I went from the Emperor. I remember back in those days, they had an Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, the AMP supermarkets. First classical record I ever bought was a Rachmaninoff Second Symphony for 29 cents in a bin there. And I brought that home. Then there was a Richard Rodgers Victory at Sea, which is sort of a hybrid theater popish classical. So it was just a gradual discovery of that music. All the while, when the pop, you know, there was a record by the Walker Brothers that I love. Early Elvis. I can't say that I am or was an Elvis fan, but those early Elvis records, I remember. Joe, you're not old enough to remember. Was it Bobby Darin? Yeah, Splish Splash. You guys old enough to remember?
Of course.
And the Danny and the Juniors record called At the Hop. And I, along with the, you know, Beethoven and Bach then, and I was later on 20th century. But I loved pop music. I just loved it.
But then how did you start lessons? How did you?
Yeah, I started when they brought that, my uncles and dad hauled that upright up the hill to our house and put it in our house. Got a tuner to come out and get the thing working.
Yeah, and so it would be very daunting listening to Van Cliburn and Rachmaninoff Second and not knowing how you
No, that was apes around the monolith.
Yeah.
I was an ape around the monolith saying, what is this? I could put my hands on the keyboard, but I mean, equating it with what I was hearing.
Now, we haven't mentioned that you, I'm pretty sure, are the first broken record guest to have played in the NFL. So you were.
I always say, listen, I can't believe I get to work with Joe Henry. I was just literally even now, Joe thinks I'm grooming him. I don't mean to. And I always say, Joe and I, when I say things to Joe, what do I say to you, Joe?
Try not to take this as a compliment.
Yes, because I don't mean it. I mean it, Bruce, more as a statement of fact.
Yeah. How about this? Try not to take this a compliment. You played for the Cincinnati Bengals.
you know, yeah, I said, I won't say what I was going to say. What I was going to say was going to sound mean. But even though I'm working with Joe Henry in this opportunity, I am unquestionably the greatest pianist ever produced by the NFL. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I may hear from that now, right?
Yeah, someone's going to come out now.
Yeah, there's a defensive end. He's the kid who's so dominant for the Cleveland Browns.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I can't remember his name off the top of but I read he's in love with poetry. He writes poetry.
Yeah.
I've not read any of it. I don't know, but I know he loves it and he writes poetry.
So, and you played for 2 years at Penn State. I think you guys were undefeated those years.
My redshirt junior and senior year, I was redshirted, tore up a knee in a national wrestling tournament. So I was held out for a year. And then, we were undefeated in 68, 69.
I guess I should ask you, you played for Joe Paterno back when he was starting.
My sophomore year, I'm going to date myself here. My sophomore year was Joe's first year as head coach.
Wow. What was he like in the first year as a head coach?
Very, very, very. He had that fiery Italian temperament. And I lived in fear of him. Not because I couldn't fill my hands with his little throat, and that'd be the end of that. It's because I feared disappointing him. We sensed, and I have buddies, I talked to an old buddy, Steve Smear, today. We had a sense, when you're a kid, you don't know these things, but we had a sense. We were in the presence of a unique human being, and we had no problem having faith in what he was telling us to do. And that was the beginning. It became something else, apparently.
Of course. When
it grows so monolithic, it's very easy to lose one's self in all that. Mm-hmm. And that's a long conversation about what. But in the beginning, Joe was young. He had been there as an assistant for 15 years, I think. Mm-hmm. You could tell when he took over that he was ready for that job. He had his own ideas about how to make this thing work.
One last break, and we'll be back with Mike Reid and Joe Henry.
You've said that football made you depressed, even in college.
I look back on my life now. I'm at the age where you do an assessment of what your life has been, And I think the last time I loved playing that game, I was in high school.
No,
I think you've told me the same.
Have I, Joe?
By the time that it was a profession for you, that you knew you did it well, but there wasn't a passion for it.
It could have been the professionalism. Joe's son, Levon, is can I say, Joe, or maybe you should talk about Levon?
No.
He's a unique carbon life form, this boy. And I don't even want to use the word talent, Bruce. He's such look at me, I'm struggling. But Lee has said that he worries about pursuit life in music for fear that the economic parts of it will disturb what he is going to try to do or find. Am I saying that right, Joe?
Well, pretty much, Levon has said he's concerned that doing it as a business might damage his love for music. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that his witness of my career, which has been both incredibly rewarding and also, difficult. I've spent a lot of my working life out in the margins, and I think Levon has witnessed both my devotion to what I do and also observed that it has been extraordinarily hard for me at times. And the difficulty has not necessarily been about I can't write a song. My difficulty has been, the people who I connect myself with in hopes of carrying these songs out to whatever life they may have beyond me. And I'm not surprised at all that he has looked at the business of it and wanted to protect as sacred his relationship to music, because it's easy to get demoralized. He certainly has seen me demoralized, and I'm not trying to pretend as if my life has been so extraordinarily hard, but my life in music has not been made easy either by the way the business is constructed nor the kind of songs I choose to pursue. Mm-hmm. Though Mike and I quote this to each other all the time. Rob Reiner recently made this wonderful film documentary about Albert Brooks. And at one point, Albert Brooks' manager, he's telling a story to Rob that, his manager had said to him at some point, "Albert, you always take the hard road." And Albert said, "The problem is you think I see two roads." And that's how I feel about my working life. It's not like I've chosen, the harder path. I'm walking the only path that I see. And in fact, it's a path that I can't see. What does the Tao say? The path that can be named is not the path. If you recognize it as a path, you're probably on somebody else's. It's not like I've chosen to be difficult or I've chosen to be an acquired taste or all the polite ways people talk about music that is not exactly what we would call popular. And I'm not disparaging myself. I'm just making I've not really learned how to fully monetize what it is that I do. It's not a natural fit for everybody. And I understand that. I grew up listening to people who were not natural fits for everybody. I was really accustomed to going to high school and being in love with music and expecting that nobody that I knew would have any idea about it. So I've just always understood that the people that I held most sacred were somehow some kind of secret, because I had it and nobody else did. Mm-hmm. Not that I didn't think that I was good at it, but I think about the old, quote from Mark Twain. To be good is to be lonesome, and I that made sense to me when I heard it, because when I was doing the work that I thought was the best work I could do, it was frequently the things that were the least resonant for other people. When I was on a label that was owned by Disney, when I made the record called Scar, I got called into the president's office, who would never be paying any attention to somebody like me in that moment. I got called into Bob Cavallo's office. It was like a scene from a movie. He closed the door with a remote control. I walk in and this big mahogany door just slams behind me as if by will. And he's just heard this song that I've recorded with Ornette Coleman. And he said, "You're not really going to put this on a record." I said, "Put it on a record? It's my opus. It opens the record." And he said, we got into a little bit of a scrap about it. And he thought I was being difficult. He thought it was the most puzzling thing imaginable.
Was that the Richard Pryor song?
Yes. Yeah. He also made that difficult. He said, you can't use Richard Pryor's name in a song title without his permission. I said, sure I can. He's a public figure. And by the way, on the same record, there's a song called Edgar Bergen. You're not saying, get Candy Bergen's permission or it's over. Mm-hmm. But they were so afraid of Richard as a volatile figure, even though at that moment, Richard was strapped into a wheelchair up in Encino, unable to speak. But the idea that I was going to somehow transgress and open them up to an altercation with the Richard Pryor family, they said I couldn't do it. They said, you have three choices. You can leave the song off the record, which I wasn't willing to do. You can change the title. I said, I can't. That tells you how to hear it. I never mentioned Richard in the song. I'm singing in first person. Or you can get his permission. The path of least resistance was the last one. And through some wild serendipity that my life is full of, which you don't have time for right now, I found Richard. Mm-hmm. And it led to me writing a screenplay, being asked by him and his wife to write a screenplay based on his life. And then when that fell apart as an enterprise. My brother and I wrote a book about him. It put all kind of things in motion. The fact that they
a great book about it.
Thank you. Insisted that my only choice was to find Richard.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what they were doing for me in that regard. As my friend Alan Toussaint used to say to me, "Here you are, off the beaten path again." I wasn't trying to live over there. That's just where I could afford the housing.
I do want to talk a little bit, because I'm interested very much in how you wrote melodies. We haven't mentioned, probably the song you're best known for is "I Can't Make You Love Me," which is first recorded by Bonnie Raitt, and since has been recorded by everybody, I think.
A number of covers, yeah.
It's been called, Dawn Was called it the best song ever written. So it's up there. It's
best
certainly
song ever written. What, Joe? Come on, you got a comment to make on that. What's that the equivalent? Declaring something the best song ever written is like what?
Well, I wish I could hand it to you. I'm just somebody who stands in that line. I think it's a towering achievement, and the reason I think so is purely because you can listen to how flexible it is. Listen to Bonnie's version, listen to Bon Iver's version, listen to Prince. I was just saying to Mike in the cab, we were talking about it. Listening to Prince do that song, it's like watching, a grown man eat candy, just devouring it. And the flexibility of that, and in all those, there's nothing about any of those versions. There's not one of those that doesn't pierce me. It's
Nancy Wilson, great version.
Yeah,
it's
great
real.
version
That's
from
one
her.
of my favorites, Bruce.
But it's what the great film directors might typically say, to an actor. I don't need you to be overly emotive. Just deliver the words. This is a great script. Let it do the work. You just have to be here and let it move through you. I think this is one of those songs. Not that it doesn't invite people who can really dig into a song and take it somewhere, but you have to do very little, I think, for that song to put you in its crosshairs.
Whatever the famous line is, we all long for somebody who longs for us.
Yeah. I mean, it gets down to something that's that fundamental. And what does Tom Waits say? I love beautiful melodies telling me terrible things. It references something that is heart-wrenching, and it does so carried along by this sublime melody. I can't imagine any great singer who wouldn't want to take it on.
It's interesting when I was re-listening to it and listening again to this album in the light of it, it's interesting how the melody is kind of stretched across the harmonies. The melody's actually, and it's a slow song, but it's quite syncopated.
Yeah.
In a way that's sort of unexpected for that kind of song.
Well, look, I'm thinking about, I saw a piece on William Goldman, and he asked Sondheim in a conversation, "Steve, when you write, do you know what you're doing?" And Sondheim said, didn't even hesitate. He said, "Absolutely not. No. If I knew what I was doing, I would have never written a bad song." And I have done that, So look, if I knew when that music came out, after, that was a different song for like months and months. My friend Alan Shamlin and I worked on it. But when that particular phrase came out, I didn't even think of those. I had two lines. "I can't make you love me. You can't make your heart feel something. If you don't, you can't make your heart feel something that it won't." And I wrote it as Mike would write, as an up-tempo bluegrass song. And then we couldn't get any more lines, and so I would put it away and we would go at something else. So that's all to say, Bruce, that if I knew what I was doing, I would have written 10 more of those. I managed to be musically out of the way and allow something to happen, and then say, okay, let's continue to pull that thread.
It must be said, though, that sometimes knowing what to do is knowing how to surrender to a song's emerging authority. I have a dear friend, the poet who lives in the Bay Area, Jane Hirschfield, and everybody who knows me has heard me repeat this because it was so important to me when she wrote it to me in an email one day. She said, "Joseph, don't ever forget that the poem has an intelligence the poet does not possess. But you have to know a fair amount, understand the fundamental truth of that. The song knows something that I don't know. And that's not me claiming to be some kind of, mystic character that just gets visited upon like nobody else does. I'm just saying I recognize over and over again that when something is in motion, I'm attending to it, I'm involved, and I'm committed, but I know that I'm not the driver.
You guys are determined not to let me demystify songwriting, aren't you? Because
It can't
my
be.
whole job as a
Bruce,
journalist.
I feel so badly for you.
Yeah, you should.
Because mysteries, the great mysteries are not to be dispelled. They're to be abided.
Well, here's
hey, take your best shot.
Okay, I'm going to dispel a small mystery then.
Okay.
Because I notice you use a technique on a couple songs here that I've seen you, well, particularly "Walk on Faith," your song, which was that was a hit for you, right?
Yeah, it was.
I told you he did research.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Bruce, yeah, it was. I had a marvelous life going as a little songwriter, people cutting songs. I had 2 little kids, and Willie Nelson recorded a song called There You Are. It's called There You Are. Mm-hmm. And Bob Montgomery, the late great Bob Montgomery, it was Columbia then, before it became Sony, said, boy, I love Willie's record. I love that song, but I really like your demo. Why don't you make a record? And I went, well, okay. Well, that's no way to make a record, Yeah. So I did, tripped over myself, and the next thing I know, I'm leaving my family, flying down the highway on a bus with a bay full of T-shirts with my picture on it, and wondering, okay, what is this? Let's accept the adventure. But I was too young and too stupid and too close to really understand accepting the adventure.
Okay.
Have you got any of those T-shirts in medium?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
They're still in the cannon. He's going to fire into the crowd tonight. Well, let me talk about the song, because you do something in that song, which is, and I think it relates to your love of rhyme, but I love that there's a little delay before, and the last line is, I'm sorry, trust and love.
Trust and love, yeah. Well,
right.
So that's not really, first of all, I got into, speaking of Sondheim, wonderful, because he was fierce about perfect rhymes. Mm-hmm. And I know you invoke Rodney.
Yeah.
That's one of the things he tells the people at camp, right?
Yeah, he's very much a stickler for really clean, hard rhyme. Yeah.
And of course,
And I'm not in the least.
you're not, Joe?
No. I think sometimes like the half rhyme is just a complete delight. There's something very human about the near miss that I'm just sort of in love with, and I'm probably, here I am being more revealing than about myself than maybe my songs have ever been. Mm-hmm. But I just, it just seems so human to me. I don't feel that I'm a lazy writer. I've been accused of that by a particular peer of mine, and I mean in a loving way, because I don't write to a strict meter like a Burt Bacharach song where every word matches a value of a note. I come out of a much more of a blues tradition where if the right word is if the right phrase is, it has a few too many syllables, if there's not a really smart way to make that work any other way, you sing something as a pickup note, that's perfectly fair game.
Mm-hmm. And I would hate to think, Joe, that you would encumber your words by saying, no, this has to be a perfect rhyme. It could be because they're of the place you go down into where your lyrics takes one. I can give you a couple that I find enormously satisfying. Sondheim's Sweeney Todd. Nothing's going to harm you, not while I'm around. Demons are prowling everywhere nowadays. I'll send them howling. I don't care. I got ways. Now, I find that enormously satisfying. But the meaning of what's being said there is pretty much on the surface of things. That's nothing to figure out, nothing for the rhyme to obscure. There's another Lorenz Hart, My Romance. doesn't need a castle rising in Spain or a dance to a constantly surprising refrain. I find that very satisfying. But those meanings of those two things are very on the surface. You don't have to go down with a light and try to investigate. So in that sense, Joe, I mean, I think perfect rhyme is something to shoot for. Sondheim was a stickler because he came from that in the old theater days. That was the tradition. And by the way, in Walk on Faith, Bruce, it's a kind of sloppy rhyme, really. Up with love,
It's not
never give up.
It's not the rhyme so much as the pause before the last line.
Oh, that's interesting.
That it's what you do with it, and you did it a couple times on this one, and I think it makes the last rhyme so much more satisfying if there's that.
Oh, that's nice.
Delay.
That's a beautiful observation on your part, and very meaningful
when a
to me.
suspended moment of pause is the hook.
That's the hook.
Sometimes that is really, really the case, whereas the absence of something that is the thing that you can't take your ear off of.
Right.
Waiting for that moment of suspension, and then there's finally a relief of that tension, and that's the payoff. It's not in a word, it's not in the concept, it's in an articulation of suspension and release.
I've taken up far too much of your time. I was going to ask about just about every song on this album. And, City of Light, that beautiful line, and I'd love to know when this occurred to you. Now is the prize all along.
I'm sure that was a moment where, the beautiful thing about writing intentionally in rhyme, and it's interesting, I read a lot of poetry, but I don't read rhyming poetry, and yet I write in rhyme all the time. I find that reaching for rhyme frequently brings me to thought that I didn't have otherwise. I can kind of remember being surprised when that line landed, now was the prize all along, because I believed it when it happened. I believed it when I saw it laying there on the page, but it was not anything I thought like, it's a thought I've had, how can I say it pretty? Mm-hmm. The rhyme invited me there, and then I just believed it.
I also want to ask about the last song, So We May, which, I mentioned to you, the album almost reminded me of sort of a 19th century collection of ballads. This reminded me of it's like a national anthem, this song almost, So We May.
Wow.
It's about a possibility being laid out, and do we pick it up?
Yeah, I think it is about personal responsibility too. That's something I think about after the fact, nothing I thought about when I was writing those words. And that's a situation where I think Michael, landed a melody for it that sounded, once I heard it, I knew it couldn't go any other way. It just sounded absolutely inevitable to me. It's a song that I think, I dare say, Mike and I are both particularly proud of. It happened like it was supposed to when I heard it. It's what it felt like.
I think that's how we end it. Thank you so much. What an honor.
Bruce, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks for your
Beautiful.
time.
See you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Just great.
In the episode description, you'll find a link to Mike Reid and Joe Henry's album, Life and Times, as well as a collection of songs spanning both their careers. Be sure to check out youtube.com/Broken Record Podcast to see all of our video interviews. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Broken Record Pod. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced and edited by Leah Rose with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.